Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and it's the bye week now. And it's time for us to look into the future of the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to be previewing the 2024 offseason. It may seem kind of early to you guys, but hey, you gotta remember, this is work that the teams do way before we ever talk about it. And it's a good time to really look at the future because we don't got football this weekend for Jacksonville. We do have some big games going on, but they will be on a bye. And it's a good time to really just evaluate the future of this team, evaluate where they are right now, maybe forecast some of the moves that we'll see. But I want to give you guys a good idea of the cap situation. I want to talk about the performance of players, talk about needs, and how they will probably go about continuing to build this team based off the trends they've set and what really makes sense for the future. So I appreciate you joining me for this. It's going to be a fun video. I've been waiting a while to be able to do this, and finally, we are here. So awesome news. But let's go ahead and let's jump into this. So we're going to start, first of all, by just evaluating the current salary cap situation this year. We'll talk about cap rollover, what they carry over. It's already factored in on over the cap. And then we're going to go through the players they have contracts they could get off of, players that they could extend, how have they performed, all that, yada, yada. So, 2023. There has not been a whole lot of changes here since the start of the season. We do have one change that took place yesterday. And for you guys, I think this will be 2 days ago, because I'm recording this, I believe, the night before the video will go out, because I plan as of now to have this out Thursday morning. But yesterday, for myself, Jacksonville traded for left guard Ezra Cleveland from the Minnesota Vikings. And you'll see that reflected here. And the good news, pretty far down the list, because his base salary really is not a whole lot of money. You're paying him roughly half of this, maybe a little more, because you're getting him for more games in the season. But Jacksonville only has to pay about $1.6 million for a starting caliber left guard who fits the system really well. And I think it's fair to say that he could have a role with this team past this year, given that the rumors he really just demands to play tackle are not that legitimate. And I'm not too concerned with it right now. I hear a lot of people talking about this just nonstop. I think it's probably been the top gripe for the pick because people are looking at this as a rental. I do not see it that way. Because here's the thing. We'll take a look at what Ezra Cleveland has played in the NFL. And we're going to look at a lot of other players. But I want to kind of straighten this up for you guys because this is part of the future for this team. It's a big conversation. You look at the positions he's playing here. It's left guard. All the way down this year. Snaps by position. 0 snaps out at tackle this year. Go back to 2022. 0 snaps at tackle. 2021. 0 snaps at tackle. 2020. 0 snaps at tackle, but he played on the right side. Ezra Cleveland has not played tackle in the NFL at any point in his career. When he did play tackle was in college. He played it for, I believe, Boise State. You actually just see the college here. Kind of bailed me out when I forgot it. But that's a long time ago now. You know, you're talking about experience he had at tackle from 4 years ago from when he's getting extended. Whether like with us or with their team. I do believe he'll probably end up being with us if he's anything like he was in Minnesota. But an NFL team is going to have an incredibly difficult time going out and paying a guy a crap ton of money to play a position they have absolutely no experience at in the NFL. And you also look at what Ezra Cleveland has said himself, specifically minicamp, OTAs before this season. He said at this point he views himself as a guard in the NFL. That is where all of his experiences come. What he said about tackle was that he'd be willing to play it. If someone wants to put him there, he's absolutely okay getting into that kind of role. So, not a big deal. I mean, and you want that, right? Like, this is a guy that ideally for an NFL team, he's your guard still, right? But he can also play swing tackle, which I think is a really powerful thing to have on your roster. That's what's great about Walker Little right now, is that even though he's just not a left guard, you can still play him there. He does pretty well, and he can also swing out to tackle and play at a high level. So that's really what Ezra Cleveland's going to be. I'm not concerned about this idea that he's going to force his way out of the team because he demands he's going to play left tackle in the NFL and every team's going to be clamoring for it. I think it's a little crazy to say. If he wants to play tackle in the NFL, he's probably not going to get paid a whole lot next year because a team's got to take a massive risk on that because he has absolutely no experience at the NFL level. His experience is playing for the Boise State Broncos. So, whole different level right there. So, I just want to get that out of the way because I think that's a really important conversation to be had around him and one of the biggest gripes. But this is our one thing that has changed this year since the season started. So, not a huge change in cap. They let go Ben Barch for him. And so, essentially, flipping those guys around, the cap is almost the exact same as it was before. Maybe like minus $500,000, but not really a huge deal. So, with that said, let's go ahead. Let's start looking through 2024, kind of talking about these players, how they performed. And a key you're going to get here for all these guys is that honestly, all of them performed really well this year, or at least better than they did the previous season. And so we'll start from the top, and then we'll talk about some of the free agents on the right, how they've been, whether they really got a shot back with the team. Of course, we'll probably miss on some things, but right now, these are our best projections. So Cam Robinson, first of all. So Cam has been starting for the Jaguars for 4 weeks this season. Walker Little also has been starting for 4 weeks. Although he got injured when Cam Robinson came back about a drive and a half after playing tackle. And you see for Cam this year, he has become a much better player as a pass blocker. Just going off what PFF says. And this is a good way of looking at it because whether or not you like the grades, you still get all the information like the amount of sacks he's allowing, the hits, the hurries, the pressures, his efficiency, penalties. All that information is really valuable whether or not you like how they grade him. And so Cam Robinson, he's allowed 2 sacks since he came back. It's not terrible, but hey, I mean, it is going to beat his mark last year if he keeps on track, and he has not played as much to this point. He's already been out for 4 weeks of the season. But you do see that in general, the pass blocking grades are much better. But what has hurt this season has been the run blocking. Has not been as good of a player doing that. So that is a concern that he's not improving in that regard because we can't just say Cam Robinson has been a better player. I think you still are getting the same kind of production where he's not necessarily average. He's above average, but you don't necessarily want to be stuck in the situation where you're paying a guy who is a little above average that superstar kind of money, which is what ends up happening, especially at tackle. And so what we have to compare this to is Walker Little and how he's performed this year. And Walker Little has been a really damn good football player. You look at his passing grades, maybe not as high, but he's allowed just 1 sack on the season. He's only allowed 5 pressures. Not a whole lot. If we go back to Cam, I'll actually look at the pressures. He's also allowed 5 pressures. And he's played a little less than what Walker Little has at this point. So Walker Little, I think you can make the argument he's been just as good in pass protection. But where you see him being a better player is as a run blocker. And that's something that this offensive line has really missed for the last year. We talked about it a lot in the offseason. It was something I really wanted them to address. And it's part of the reason why I personally was so excited about getting Ezra Cleveland yesterday, because you get a guy you could put on the interior where you're the weakest as a run blocking unit, and you put him next to a guy like Luke Fortner, who's got some strength concerns, but really good technician. And now you got another really good player who can help you push the ball up the middle on those short yard situations. So Walker Little, he's a big part of that. Not in the interior, but obviously on the outside, maybe on your zone plays, but really talented tackle. I would say at this point, he's performing better than what a guy like Cam Robinson has. Now, I want to make this very clear. Both players playing pretty dang good this year. I really don't have a problem with either of them. But when we look at the long-term roster construction. If these were your only two tackles, then okay, you stomach probably moving Walker Little to right tackle because Cam's just going to leave if you tell him, hey, you're not playing left tackle. It's just the way it's going to be because you're asking him to play a whole new position. He's never played. There's a ton of money on the line, and he's not guaranteed anything at this point in the season. Everything from now on is not guaranteed. Obviously, though, they're not going to cut him this year because they're trying to make a Super Bowl. And he's already been a part of the team. He's done fine. You're going to keep that depth for the year. But when you look at the cap space, Walker Little's still got another year left where he's getting paid, ultimately what he's earning that year is $1.7 million. The cap number is a little different because you have the prorated bonus that he's already been paid that is being factored into the cap for this year. But your effective change, rostering him or not, is $1.7 million. It's not even a discussion whether he's on the team for that reason. The only way he'd leave is a trade, and obviously don't want to be in that situation. Cam Robinson, on the other hand, is 10 times that. You look at the number, it's nearly $18 million. And so, as much as we like Cam Robinson, I know it seems like I probably don't because I've talked so many times on the YouTube channel about we need to move on and we need to get Walker Little out there. It's nothing to do with not liking Cam Robinson. It's the fact that you have a young tackle who's really talented and you need to see him for a full season before you go give him a contract. And you need to take advantage of having that small contract because if they didn't extend Cam Robinson, if they kept him on the tag last year, then ultimately they would have had the money, say this year if they didn't keep him, to go get a pass rusher. Like, you're not worrying about getting Danielle Hunter too much because what he was paid this year is almost identical to what Cam Robinson got this year. It's a very different story. And so that's a lot of the issue we have with that because you want to pay your younger players, especially when they're performing just as good and their pay is a tenth of what another guy's is. So Cam Robinson, realistically, end of the year, I think he's a guy that unfortunately isn't going to be a part of the organization. Because you've got a guy waiting in the wings who's earned it at this point. I think he's earned it multiple times, and you've got to reward that at some point before he says, yeah, screw this. Like, I don't want to play for you guys. You won't give me a fair chance. So I think this is where the decision's got to come. I think you can trade him with how well he's performed. Let me turn down my phone ringer here really quick so you don't hear every ring notification. But say it's a trade, say it's a cut, this number is going to be the same. We're just going to put in a trade for the sake of putting in a trade. Now, these other guys, probably going to be shorter conversations because I think it's a little more straightforward. But Cam Robinson is the big question. And I think what you do with Cam Robinson probably leaving the team, you're obviously going to have Walker Little take over that left side. Anton Harrison's your right tackle. Luke Fortner has 2 years left on his rookie deal. They are in love with him right now as a center. Although, as we see as fans, he's got to hit the weight room. He's got to get more functional strength. He's still going to be the center going forward, unless he is just atrocious this next season or for the rest of this season. Left guard, I think Ezra Cleveland ends up sticking around. I just think he's just too good of a fit for this team for them to just say, hey, we'll see you later. We'll go back to not having a left guard. There's a reason why you acquire him. And I think it's kind of an outlier for them to get him for so cheap of a price. And you see that with their trade acquisitions. They constantly, when they're trading with other teams, get incredible bargain deals because they're looking for deals that no one else is thinking about and with teams who just don't want the player, for whatever reason. This reason is that they found another guard that they like, better fit for their system. And they think he's just as good and he's going to be cheaper. And they got to pay Kirk Cousins probably a lot of money to stick around, and that's their best option. They got to pay Justin Jefferson, Danielle Hunter. So it makes sense for the Minnesota Vikings to get rid of Ezra Cleveland, just obviously not for the price they did. And then at right guard, you got Brandon Scherf, who I think is going to stick around for that final year. If you let him go, it does show $9 million here, but factor in, if you let him go, that's $9 million this season. And then 2.5 in 2025, 2026, and 2027. So you are still saving $16.5 million. It didn't really guarantee extra money, when they restructured, it just moved where the money was going to be. And if they decide, hey, we're going to let you go early, then that's just going to get rid of the void years. So I think regardless of him being a potential savings opportunity, he's your right guard. He's the one guy who clearly can play there. Technically, Ezra could, but I mean, then you just create the left guard problem again. I think Brandon Scherff sticks around another year. And then maybe 2025 is where he walks. He's going to be 34 years old. And, for what he's offered to the team, I think it's been okay. I think you can finish out the contract with him, but it's not been so good that you're necessarily sitting there we have to go re-sign this guy. So that's how I see the offensive line. We'll look at Ezra Cleveland's potential contract, assuming that he performs like is expected and like he did in Minnesota, especially this year, improving as a pass protector. But as far as our other guys, Darius Williams, there's no way they're letting him go. You're saving $10 million if you let him go, but he has been one of the best cornerbacks in the league this year. Just an incredible amount of pass breakups. I believe he leads the NFL right now. We've seen him be clutch over and over, finally getting his hands on the ball, finally bringing down interceptions. And once he did, he's doing it almost every single week now. So Williams, he's a guy you keep around. And he's also a guy who's proven that he will negotiate and work with the team to make it to where he can be retained and he's not going to kill your cap. He took a cheap deal to come to this team. So I'm not concerned at all about him walking and then releasing him after this season. I think he's clearly here. Same for Christian Kirk. Just really valuable player on the offense. Right now, he is your best receiver. You can't let that go. You still got 2 more years of him. He's going to be a guy who plays out that entire contract. And, once he's 30 and the contract's over, then I think they'll probably end up extending him still. And they'll play him until he's just not the same guy he's been. But that's a long time down the road. Lawrence, no conversation, obviously. Aluakon, no conversation too. I mean, he's been arguably the best linebacker in the league. I don't know if he's number 1, but he's definitely top 5. Incredible player, all over the field, incredibly smart, just really getting better every single season. Absolute steal by the Jaguars. He is a guy that you are not going to let go from this team probably until the end of his career. Whether that's 2 years on another team or, just retiring here. And hopefully he ends up retiring here. I think he's just that good of a player that up to the time he retires, he's going to be able to start for them. So no conversation there. Same with Walker, obviously, rookie contract. Fadakasi is an interesting one. Because for me, I'm very much on the fence. I think he's a guy that could go if they want to save some money. But he also just had one of his best games. He was, I believe, the highest rated defensive player this last week. Although I want to note that this is on 19 snaps. Okay? One of his smallest workloads of the year. And so essentially what you're talking about paying him is going to be around $8 million. That's basically if you keep him. That's the effective change between keeping him and letting him go. Because you have $3.5 million here. And then you see in 2025, he's here. He does not have a base salary, but he does have $4.5 million against the cap. So that's one of those void years. So for him, he's going to be a guy that I think they could definitely consider it with because it's $8 million you're talking about. It's just not that you're saving the $8 million all in 2024. It's also in 2025 and beyond. So just split up over those years. He's a guy, I think right now, with how he's played, I'm not super convinced. I think he'd be okay, but you do have to decide at some point which players you're going to walk from. And ultimately, that's because you have so many guys in 2025 that have to be extended. If we take a look at that, look at guys like Darius Williams hitting this list. Trevor Lawrence is going to be on his 5th-year option this season. He'll probably get about $30 million, maybe more. Tyson Campbell, $20 million a year kind of guy, maybe 25. Cisco's going to get near 20 million. ETN, 15, 16 million. Walker Little, 20 million. Like, these are big contracts. And you know what that doesn't factor in is all these guys who aren't on this list because they're technically not shown since they're on the books in their void years. Doesn't mean you can't re-sign them, but they're just not on the list because, like, Brandon Scherf's over here because he's got a void charge. He's also a free agent. Foyesade Luakon. Fatukasi, obviously we're talking about him right now. Zay Jones, Rayshawn Jenkins. You've got guys that you've got to worry about in 2025, and you have to free up the money to where it can work. And it won't be a huge deal as much as people think because that first year cap hit is pretty low, and so they'll have enough here. And then that second year of those contracts, you see there's just way more on the table. And by that point, you're going to have a lot of guys in here from the draft, and it's going to be a whole different roster. We're not really going to be able to evaluate that far out. But Fatukasi, to me, is a guy that just has not had enough of an impact to really justify where he's at right now on the salary cap charges. And so he's a guy that I would cut. I don't think you're trading him for anything. I mean, maybe like New York says, hey, we'll take him for a year because they had him before, but we're not going to assume that. And then you go down the rest of this list. Roy Robertson Harris, this is the first year of his new contract. He took a pay cut. You're not considering cutting him at this point, and you don't even save money. Zay Jones, sure, he's had injury issues, but I don't think it's so bad that you can't pay him that final year. And we've seen when he's on the field, he's a huge impact. I believe that this team will probably go out, draft a guy, whether first round, second round, or wherever in the draft, just someone who can go out there and start where Zay Jones does if he's injured, or, you know, say for Calvin Ridley or for Christian Kirk. Rayshawn Jenkins, probably the last of these names you could consider cutting that has a big impact, but I still wouldn't do it. Because although you save, you see about $5 million there, and then that final year, almost $4 million. So $9 million is what we're talking about saving on him. Just split up over 2024, 2025. He's just been such a good player for them, you know, in these clutch moments. I don't think you can let that go. I think you just might as well finish out the contract. And you also have to consider, if you let these guys finish out their contracts, you're getting comp picks for them if another team signs them. If we release Cam Robinson or trade him, let's just say we release him, we don't get a comp pick because we didn't finish out our contract with him, which is why we try to trade him. Fatukasi here, same thing. Like, you're not getting a comp pick from that. So you want to be wary of that and consider in the draft capital as well, but also consider that if you spend money in that free agency, you're not going to get the comp pick anyway. So you got to be cognizant of all that. There's a lot of moving pieces in the puzzle, but I think that ultimately Rayshawn is a guy you probably finish out the contract with. I can't imagine them moving on from him. So we'll leave him here. And like I said, he's played pretty well this year. You know, not perfect, but you see him being an impact. And then from this point on, you don't really have anyone that makes sense. You know, you got guys who are under contract for a while. There is one name that I think would probably go, and it's just because he really has not touched the field at all this year. We'll actually look at the snap count out of curiosity, and that's JaMycal Hasty. Not that I don't like him at all, but just he's not getting an opportunity here because they loaded up so much on the team. So if we go to snaps by position, yeah, over this whole year, he's been activated 3 weeks, and he's got 20 snaps. You know, if you're not paying him more than the veteran minimum, I think you keep him. You might as well. But technically, because it is over the veteran minimum, you could save a little bit. He's going to be a guy that probably goes. So I think that'll be a move they make. And then you'll have some of these lower guys, not necessarily all the rookies, but just some of the guys who've been around for a little bit, maybe not making a big impact, who will end up going because you'll have to make room for your draft picks and you'll have to make room for any free agents that you pursue. So, you know, who knows who it's going to be? Maybe a guy like Leonard Taylor. Luke Farrell is possible, although I don't think so. But that's one of those small things. Now let's talk about some of these guys on the right and people who got to be extended. We'll kind of project contracts here. I'll give you an idea of what they'd be paid, what I think is going to happen at this point. Ezra Cleveland, please understand when we do this, this is entirely projection. We have no clue what he's going to be paid right now. We have no clue if he's going to perform well on the team. I think he will. I'm also a huge fan, though, so I'm a little biased. But we don't know yet. If he doesn't perform well, he's not going to earn a lot of money. But I think realistically, I think he comes in, plays well for the team. He's a great fit. He's worked with Phil Rauscher before. He was probably a part of the process to draft him, I would have to imagine, because he was the OL coach. So I think you bring him in this year, and I think you extend him to be that left guard for the future. So we're probably talking, maybe 11, 12 million. We'll go with a high number here just to make sure you guys kind of see what maybe worst case scenario is as far as just the little differences in what people are paid. So let's say it's 12 million. So the way we do these and the way teams do this, essentially your signing bonus is going to be your average per year minus the base salary for the first year. And the base salary for the first year is always going to be the minimum you can pay them. So what's 12 million minus 1.125 is going to be 10,875, and he gets 12 million. So this is what he's paid the first year, because he gets a signing bonus immediately, but the cap charges are split across all these seasons. So it allows them to backload the contract. But he is getting 12 million that first year, and he gets 12 million the rest of these seasons. So now we just put in 12 million for base salary on these seasons, and you get your contract. So that's how we negotiate these. If you ever want to mess around with over the cap, that's generally what the Jaguars have done for contracts. We'll also avoid looking at like guaranteed salary. They do what they do there. Usually on a 3-year deal, they guarantee part of the second season. So, it's not just a one and done. But let's say he earns a good contract, plays well. You got your left guard of the future. You've got everyone under contract for that offensive line. And then we look at Josh Allen. And last offseason, I made a video about it, about people going after him, or just the general question of like, do you pay a guy who has not lived up to the hype what he wants? And I think it was as simple as you pay him what he's worth. Even if he didn't live up to the 7th overall pick, you still pay him. Just pay him what he's actually earned. Now, if he wants way more, then yeah, you probably got to trade him to another team who's desperate, and you get something out of him. But here's the thing. Josh Allen right now might be the best pass rusher in the NFL this season. Like, he's up there. I believe right now he's like first in pressures in the league. He's second in sacks. The only guy ahead of him was Danielle Hunter. He's having an incredible season. He is that elite pass rusher for the Jaguars. And so the question's really gone to who's the second guy. And, maybe we'll talk about that when we do a mock draft or, just evaluate some of these other players. But that'll be another time. So Josh Allen, he's going to stick around. If they let him go, that's a disaster for this team. And that really just compromises your ability to compete for a championship. I think he gets a really big contract. Because you look here, it's 27. Pass rushers are good for a long time. You sign him up till he's 31. And I think right now, that market value based off of what Rashawn Gary just got, which I believe was $24 million a year, is what it shows up as against the cap. You're probably going for 25 for Josh Allen. Maybe we're a couple million off, but that's a fair estimate. So same thing here. It's 25 million minus the base salary of the first year, and that's your signing bonus. So it's 23,875. And the rest of these years, you got 25 million. One more. Although it would have been nice for that to be like, way less. And these are your cap hits. Transact that. And it's probably what your contract's looking like for Josh Allen. If you want to take a look at how these look over the seasons, this is it. See, cap numbers obviously go up, and this is something that they can restructure if they need to. Trey Herndon is paid $2.6 million this year. He's performed pretty well in the slot. Is he an elite player? No, he's not going to be. But he's done really well for the Jaguars. And I think for the price, I personally would bring him back. But if you don't, hey, I mean, you got Gregory Jr., you got Antonio Johnson. If you want to save a little bit, perhaps, you let Trey Herndon walk. But, I'd pay him, say, $3 million. I think that's a fair price. Give him a little bit of a pay increase. It's not really something that's going to kill your cap. And you get a cornerback that you can play out there. And you finish off that secondary. And, if you do replace him, if someone else does win the job, you can still keep him for that season because he's a high-end backup for you. He's a guy can come in. He's not going to be a massive liability. Now, Tyler Shatley, a lot of his contracts, looking at $1.5 million a year. I think you could see with this age, probably a 1 or 2 year deal. I'd say probably 2 years. They'll guarantee the first. And so same thing here. If it's $1.5 million, we'll do $290,000 because that with the base salary gets you to 1.5. And then we got our base salary for 2025. Now we get into an interesting one. Calvin Ridley. And this is where we're going to look at some of the draft situation, because I did want to bring this up. What does the future capital look like for the Jaguars? So here's the deal on Calvin Ridley. You see a lot of conditions here. I'll kind of explain it in layman's terms, and I will give you some insight on something I heard. I cannot confirm if it is 100% true, but there was someone, I believe in the media or like close to the team, who said this is how it works. And if it is, awesome news for the Jaguars. So Calvin Ridley right now is going to be worth the 4th round pick this year because he has not met the requirements to become a 3rd at this point. The requirements, which it says unspecified here, they have been specified. It is that he does one of 3 things. He plays 80% of the offensive snaps, 60%. He's played around 80. So even if he doesn't do good the rest of the year, as long as he starts, he's hitting that 3rd round pick requirement. So 60% of snaps, 1,000 yards, and there is a 3rd one, I believe, that has to do with receptions, or it's touchdowns. I believe it's receptions. But Calvin Ridley right now, the other 2 conditions, he's pretty much on par with them. Like, he's going to barely meet them. But the thing is, even if he doesn't meet those, he's getting so many snaps on offense that he's automatically going to go up to the 3rd round pick. So consider right now, this is what he's worth, is the 3rd rounder. That's just realistically the way it goes unless he gets hurt. You don't want that. But if he does, then maybe it's a 4th. The 2nd round pick is what it becomes if the Jaguars extend him on his contract. So then comes the question, would I extend Calvin Ridley? I think that next season, Calvin Ridley is going to be better than he was this year. It is hard to imagine a world where he is not. I think the only way is if he's on their team and he loses all the chemistry he has here. The thing is, he has not played for a long time. He's coming back now. He's done fine. He's done better than a lot of people, should have expected for him to do. Unless you pick him in fantasy, then you're wanting him to get 2,000 yards this season. Hasn't happened, unfortunately. But, I wasn't necessarily one of those people. I did get Christian Kirk, though, which was nice. But Calvin Ridley, I think at this point, he's still a part of the long-term plans for this team. Because as of now, his stats, if he keeps them up, he's going to be around 1,000 yards in his first year back, which is a pretty good season. I know we're looking at, we want him to be a 1,500-yard receiver. We want him to have those jaw-dropping numbers. I don't know if that happens this year. I think there will be a game or two where he goes off. But realistically, he's probably sitting around 1,000 yards on the year. And if he gets better than that, you're fine paying him as a receiver. And it's hard to imagine a Jaguars team where Calvin Ridley doesn't stick around. So now, here's the interesting part of it. I have heard, and he's put it on Twitter. I have to go back and see who it was. I don't want to give a wrong name. I think it was Frank Frangie, but don't confirm that. Someone close to the team said that a franchise tag does not count as a contract extension. What that means is if the Jaguars decide we are going to franchise tag you, I believe it's if he does not sign the tag before so long too, then this will stay as a third round pick because it is not considered a contract extension. Now we'll see. I'm not 100% sure that's how it works. If that is the case, and that's going to be our assumption for now until we see otherwise, and he's also obviously got to earn the contract extension still, I think at this point they're probably giving up a third round selection for him, and he's sticking around with a franchise tag. So if that's the case, this is a simple one to talk about. They just put the franchise tender on him. It's the non-exclusive, I believe, which means other teams can negotiate with him, but you have to give up 2 first-round picks for him. This is the way almost every franchise tag is. I mean, they even did it for Lamar Jackson last year, which for some reason no one wanted him, which is stupid, but not our problem. So I think Calvin Ridley is probably a franchise tag. Now what that does, obviously, is it shoots up this cap number. You can't change this. This is going to be about $23 million against the cap in 2024. And you see what happens here. We go down to $20 million or so available in cap space. It's a lot less. So that is probably going to be the one expensive contract that the Jaguars have in 2024 of all the ones they got to renegotiate. But the good news is, if you extend him after 2024, and you'll know who he is by then, at least by the end of the season, if they re-signed him, 2025 is going to be cheap because you're going to have that small first-year cap hit like you see with these guys here. Like Josh Allen is not a $7 million a year guy, but that first year, that's how it's going to show up. So you're going to get that with Ridley then in 2025 instead of having that, $25, $30 million cap hit and taking up nearly 25% of this. So there is positives as well. So we'll shoot through the rest of these guys. Dwan Smoot, paid him $4 million this year. They knew roughly what the timeline was. He was going to play about half the year. Came back, I think, week 6, possibly week 7. I believe it was week 6, though. And if he performs as expected, I think he probably gets that Arden Key kind of contract. I think he gets it with Jacksonville. I think he's probably a $7 million a year guy. Now, he's had the great plays since he came back, but maybe from a consistency standpoint, not all there yet. But hey, that's going to happen when you haven't played football in a while. So I think he's going to get back to form. Let's say this is $7 million a year. So this would be, believe that. Hopefully I got the number right. And you're looking at another $4 million against the books this year and about $10 million in 2025. Now the rest of these guys, not really big contracts to talk about here. You can argue they could come back to the team. Maybe they do. Practice squad. I think the only guys that we're absolutely certain of, Brandon McManus. At this point, I think he's earned a contract extension. Say it's a 1-year deal, probably upping it a little bit. He was paid $2 million, and he's an older kicker. He's going to be able to demand a bit, and he's a good kicker, so you're going to pay him that. The rest of this list, maybe they do with Dearness Johnson. I think Tim Jones, you still can tender him, so it's basically bare minimum. It's less than bare minimum for what veterans get. So you're going to do that. Maybe you do with Ledbetter as well. Quarterman, you could see him come back. Probably going to be the bare minimum too. Maybe they do that with Cole Van Lanen with the ERFA tag or the tender. Jamal Agnew is the one interesting one here. And then we'll do tender on Gregory Jr. because he will be back with the team. Jamal Agnew at this point, I can understand them re-signing him. Right now, as much as I like him as a punt returner and a kick returner, he doesn't really offer much else to this team. And we haven't seen a kick return touchdown since, last season. And it was early in actually, no, it wasn't even last season. It was 2021 was the last time. There is absolutely the opportunity for him to come back. But I think before they decide, hey, we're going to keep him around, you want to see him actually break out those returns. You want to see something like he did in the playoffs last year. I think just with the nature of his role with the team, I don't know if he's a guy that they're going to give a 3-year deal. He's probably going to be a yearly kind of guy. And if he earns it, you pay him $4 million, but right now, he hasn't really returned it super far often enough to justify that amount of money when you could go out and try to find someone else who can get close to that production but he's going to get bare minimum. So maybe you don't like that, but I think right now that's probably how it's going to be. Something that can definitely change, though. Plenty of time for that. So here's what you're looking at for 2024. These are our projections. And we just want to give you an idea of what this does to cap space. So this right here, 51 players go against the cap. It shows 49 under contract. We got to consider the guys we cut. It does not factor that in. So it's going to be 46 ultimately. So 5 more guys are going to hit against the cap. So consider your draft picks. You're probably talking about $6 million, $7 million there. So you got $5 million in cap space still. I don't know really if they spend anything in free agency because they got to have something that makes sense. Maybe they get that designated pass rusher kind of guy. And he'd probably go for around the price of what they have left. But you can see they're not really in a situation where they have to cut a ton of people to keep everyone around. I think they need that one big contract to shed, but there's an obvious opportunity to tackle because you got 3 guys, and one of them's getting paid a lot, and you got 2 other guys you like more long term. So I think Cam Robinson's probably the way that they save enough money. Now, look at the future past this, and then we'll talk a little bit about like the draft, the picks they have. 2025, like we said, a lot of players are going to be available to re-sign. But you see here, you got $90 million to work with. You got a lot of money. It is a lot of players, but you're probably looking at, say, $60 million for Trevor Lawrence, or sorry, not $60 million, $60 million left after Trevor Lawrence's 5th-year option. It'll probably be similar to Burrow's, which was, I think, about $30 million, just shy of that. So factor that in. And then the rest of your contracts, you look at the first year cap hits, I think you're going to get under the cap space, assuming it does go up like expected here. And then you got that $5 million or so dollars of rollover you're probably bringing over. Worst case scenario, you can restructure a player. So you do that, and you got a ton of cap space to still work with in 2026 to where, yeah, when these guys have the big cap hits, I think you're still going to be under the cap, and you're going to have that money when you need to way down the road re-sign some of these guys. So ultimately, what do I expect from them long term? I don't think that they're going to spend a lot in free agency. They've made that pretty clear. They did it that first year because they felt like they needed to build the core of this team. Now they have it, and you've seen them last offseason solely build through the draft. I mean, what is the biggest acquisition they made outside of trading draft picks or using draft picks? Well, it was Calvin Ridley. And then now you got Ezra Cleveland as well. When they see a player they like on their team, they're willing to trade compensation for it. But, I mean, they just don't do a whole ton in free agency. Dearness Johnson, maybe, was the biggest signing this last year. It was so little that you didn't even get a comp pick, or you didn't even give up a comp pick for it. So I think in the future, we're going to see the same approach. It may be boring. We're not going to get that adrenaline rush that we got in 2022 when we're like, oh my gosh, they're like spending $80 million every 10 minutes. That was exciting, but it's just not sustainable. And they have the guys on this team. There is not a lot of needs because you look at what they lose in this scenario, which I think this is very possibly what could happen. Obviously something will probably change, but we're going to be pretty close on it. What are you losing? You lose one of your 3 tackles. You still have 2 who are going to start, who are under contract. You would have in this scenario Ezra Cleveland, who you could end up having as that swing tackle. You could always draft a guy too. It's pretty simple. But it's not a huge need. Fadakasi, maybe get another defensive lineman. That's easy though. It's not a huge deal. For what Fadakasi's offered, I don't think that's super hard to replace. JaMychal Hasty, barely on the field at this point. And then you look at the rest of these guys, Chason, I think that's just Yasir Abdullah getting a bigger role. You could see it be that simple. You're replacing your kick punt returner, but you also, if you wanted to, could extend them. So you're not really losing anything this next year. You're playing with the team they've had this season, except you have, I guess, Walker Little and Anton Harrison out there instead. And then you have Ezra Cleveland in addition. So you're swapping out Cam for Ezra, and then you're losing Jamal Agnew. So you don't really need anything. I mean, this whole team is filled. Like, would you like some pieces that could help? Sure. I mean, you could use like another pass rusher, whether they're full-time or not. But they're in a really good situation. I think this next draft and entire offseason, they're just going to try to look for guys that they feel like, hey, we can get these guys developed during 2024. And then in 2025, maybe when we want to move off some of these contracts, like you're probably not keeping around Brandon Scherf again. He's going to be 34. Or say Rayshawn Jenkins walks because he's getting older. Maybe Zay Jones does. If those are things that happen, then you have guys in the wing. And so I think that's the way they're going to look at dealing with things this offseason. Now, here's the exciting thing. They got a lot of picks to do it. I think they're going to have like 9 or 10 at this point. So just considering our scenario here and what we think is likely, they're going to have their first rounder. They're going to have their second. They do not have this third. But what they do have is they have that compensatory pick from Jawan Taylor. So you see, that is the first compensatory pick. And with, I believe, Houston losing a third, or it's someone who lost a third this year, that means that this pick is going to be 96th overall. So consider where the Jaguars are going to finish this year. If they won the Super Bowl, this is one pick after the third round pick of the Super Bowl champion. So, I mean, you're basically you're equating the compensatory pick you got for Jawan Taylor to what you give up for Calvin Ridley. So you get that third back. So you got 1, 2, 3. You see also extra sixth here, although I don't think they're going to get anything for Manhurts or Marvin Jones, it looks like. A little bit of debate on there because it's super close to making it in. But you've got your 1, your 2, your compensatory third. You've got your fourth you'll get back. You've got the Saints fourth as well. Could be early in the fourth round. You've got a fifth. You've got your sixth. You do not have the Panthers sixth because this went for Ezra Cleveland. You have that compensatory sixth for Arden Key. It's going to be the first compensatory pick for that round. As you see, unfortunately, didn't make it into the fifth. Really close, but just outside. So you've got that sixth round compensatory pick as well, and the seventh rounder here. So a lot of draft capital still. Essentially, you're working with an extra fourth, sixth, and that's what you got. And then in the future, everything's pretty much a clean slate. You got all your picks. You do potentially have that seventh rounder from the Lions for Riley Patterson. I mean, not a huge deal, but it is there. And then 2027, clean slate as well. So we're not really going to see those extra picks the Jaguars have at that point, but they can still earn comp picks. And with their free agent philosophy, they're probably going to keep those comp picks because they're not going to go out and sign these mega deals with players that void the comp picks they would have got from, like this last offseason, how Jawan Taylor ended up getting them the third. They didn't lose that because they didn't go out and spend. So really good situation for the future of draft picks for this team, their draft resources. And I think when it comes to the draft, like I said, I mean, your focus is going to be finding guys who can start in that second year. You don't got to bring anyone in who absolutely has to be a plus starter for this team year one. It's not like it was in 2021 or 2020 or any of those years. You're looking for guys who you can develop, who are going to be really good long term, and you're putting them in the best situation because ideally you want to have a mentor for these kinds of guys. Say you go draft a guy like Tyler Nubin, if you know who he is, just for an example. You keep a guy like Rayshawn Jenkins on the roster, that's a pretty good mentor for him, and then maybe he's taking over in 2025. So I think that's the way the Jaguars are probably going to approach this going forward. I think it's the best way they can do it. So good news, guys. As much as it was boring last offseason in free agency, there is a reward for it. When you don't spend money on these high-priced free agency acquisitions who are not always guaranteed to work out, and get it pretty clear, we got very lucky with 2022. That might be the best free agency class in NFL history because you do not get that many guys working out in free agency classes. It was incredible what Jacksonville did, and it really restarted this entire roster. But it just usually does not work. It's not a philosophy they're going to go off of, and there's rewards for it because you're going to be able to keep the guys that you love that have been here since day one of their NFL careers. So really exciting stuff. Based off of all this that we've done, probably going to put up a mock draft, first one for 2024 during the bye week. We're not really going to have a ton of draft content, obviously, during the NFL season, but I do want to give you guys an idea of what's out there. Some of the players who could be really fun for Jacksonville because, well, hey, it's an exciting thing. And from what I know, a lot of people who watch this channel do love the NFL draft. So we will talk about that and have some exciting stuff to go off of. But I appreciate y'all watching. I really appreciate your time here. I hope you enjoy this bye week. It's great being 6-2. And there's not been a whole lot of times in this franchise history where that's happened because I think this is, the second time? And the last was 1999. So pretty good year, to compare it to. So exciting stuff. But yeah, enjoy it. We'll have to see what the AFC standings look like after this week. Jacksonville is guaranteed to be in third place at least because someone's going to lose between the Chiefs and Dolphins. And even if they tied, well, we'd be better record than both of them. And say the Ravens lose to the Seahawks, we're going to be in second. So we'll have to see what happens. But really exciting, and we'll come back to that 49ers game and have a bit of a tough stretch, but it's going to be a good year. It's going to be a really good year for this team. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.